Found footage horror normally documents the actions of characters in a film. Less frequently, that found footage also affects the characters in a film. In Man Finds Tape, we see found footage create a new reality and then double back to reshape what the characters thought they knew. In this sense, the found tape becomes a character in the film, acting on those around it and highlighting the entangled nature of cinematic art. This film is about belief. What are we willing to believe, and what do our beliefs create? How might these beliefs cause people to act in horrific ways when confronted with filmed evidence that contradicts their ideology? And who is responsible when misguided beliefs turn into tragic events?
In this episode of Horror Joy, we're joined by writers and directors of Man Finds Tape, Peter Hall and Paul Gandersman. We talk found footage horror, both the rules that govern the genre and how belief and cosmic horror run in strange parallel lines. So, set up your security cameras and let's head to church. We're sure the pastor has our best interest in heart, but even if he doesn't, don't worry, we'll get it all on tape. This is Horror Joy. We're your hosts. I'm Brian Onishi.
And I'm Jeff Stoyanoff. We're two university professors celebrating the emotional and intellectual joys of horror.
All right, y'all, we're back. This is Horror Joy. We've got a special episode for you today, and Jeff and I are excited to have on the pod Peter Hall and Paul Gandersman. They are directors of a new found footage movie coming out December 5th, Man Finds Tape. This is a really cool thing. We're going to get to talk about the movie. You've also written some books. You are kind of all over horror, doing a lot of kinds of writing. I want to hear about everything that you're doing, how things are different writing for the screen, writing for the page. But before we get into that, of course, the thing that we always want to know, we have this question. We are searching whether or not there is joy to be found in horror. There's so many gruesome things, so many awful images, but joy seems to be possible. Jeff and I found a lot of joy. We want to know if you all have found joy in horror, if you think that that is a relationship that works. Peter, I guess we'll start with you if that's okay. What do you think, Peter? Do you find joy in horror?
I find great joy in horror. It's a huge part of my life year round. And it's one of those things that I'm sure you guys have already talked about this on the pod, that when you are a horror fan, you sort of become not desensitized to it, but what becomes normal in your like watching routine that is not normal for other people when they come across it and they're like, "How could you watch that right now?" And I'm like, "No, this is comfort food." I remember back in college, I was watching Battle Royale, and it's got a bunch of teenagers killing each other in gruesome ways. And I was watching it at a friend's house and just casually eating like a bowl of ramen or something. And someone came in and was like so disgusted by that I could eat food and watch it at the same time. And I was like, "Hey, this movie's not even that bad." But B, like, yeah, this goes hand in hand with me. I don't find it shocking or repulsive for the kind of stuff that I watch. There's definitely horror that once it hits a tier of the goal is to repulse you on a physical and mental level. That's I usually don't go in for those extremes, but I could watch David Cronenberg body horror and have a bowl of Cheerios at the same time and be perfectly happy.
And for me, and this is Paul, by the way, for me, absolutely. So I can't ride roller coasters. I have a terrible fear of heights. I've tried in the past. I've actually passed out on them. Very not safe. So for me, I get that sensation by watching horror or, scary stuff, whatever, that kind of controls my emotions. I love disconnecting from reality and just having my emotions controlled. And to me, that's a joyful experience, right? It's a rare thing when that's able to happen, especially, I mean, it can happen when I'm just at home watching a movie with my wife and we're really into something. One last year that blew us away that immediately came to my mind was Smile 2. We watched Smile 2 together and we're just jaws on the floor. I actually remember there was a scare that got us so good that we literally jumped off the couch screaming and our dog ran over to us like, oh my God, are you okay? I literally had a can of sparkling water in my hand that flew across the room, all over the couch. And I wasn't upset by that. I was thrilled by that. It was joyous. We watched that a year plus ago And I'm thinking about that moment now, and I'm feeling the joy, the endorphins from that scare. Another incredible scare that sticks in my mind was the first time we watched Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House, and the scare in the car. It's just, which I think is probably the greatest jump scare of all time. Likewise, we jumped off of the couch. We had to stop. We had to pause the show for 5 minutes to like catch our breath. And that scare worked because it was rooted in emotion and character. Yeah, so I find that very joyous. And then also the experience you can get with a crowd as well. Like, I'm just talking about watching stuff at home, but one of my favorite theatrical experiences of my life was the South by Southwest screening of Evil Dead, the remake, the first, whatever, not Evil Dead Rise, but the previous one. And that was, if you've ever been in Austin, Texas, at the Paramount Theater, 1,200 seat theater, everyone's seeing that movie for the first time, and I thought the roof was going to blow off of that theater. And so, yeah, to me, that's, I don't know if this is an audio or video, but if you're listening, like, I have a huge smile on my face right now thinking about these moments. So yes, the answer is yes, definitively.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like thinking about seeing horror in a group, Weapons comes to mind most recently. Probably the fullest auditorium I've been in a long time. And the jump scares or like the surprise scares that happen throughout that movie. And like some people just who I don't know if they weren't ready for them or they just are very emotive, but like jumping out of their seats. And it was great. Like, like it's great to have that experience collectively. That's one of the things that Brian and I touch upon with how horror can form community, even like just in the space of an auditorium, even if we are holding Nicole Kidman captive somewhere in it. I want to transition so to ask you a question about being horror creators, because like, we can talk about consuming horror and how that brings us joy, but clearly there is something about horror that also brings you both joy in creating it too. So if you want to maybe give us a little bit of your origin story about how you came to be creators of horror, I think our listeners would love to hear that.
That's a good question. My sort of fascination with horror started, I wasn't like a horror kid. And it wasn't until late teens, early 20s, college years that I started to really get into horror. And I was just writing about it online. This was pre-Twitter. I had, a blog back in the day. And so I got into the horror world by writing it and then doing interviews with filmmakers and whatnot. And so it's always interested me just as a genre. And I sort of got the bug to do filmmaking, I met Paul around that same time as well when I moved to Austin in 2009. And he had gone to film school. I didn't go to film school. And I had tried to make a movie when I was 18, which is essentially just a glorified home video. It's absolutely unwatchable. And that was a horror movie. Like, anytime that I've written something creatively, just by default, it ends up in the horror sphere somehow, in some way. I don't know the sort of intentionality behind it. It's more so that I think the horror genre is one of the most malleable, flexible, welcoming of any type of story. Case in point, Man Finds Ape, which is a fake documentary. Like, that's a fun genre to explore, or a fun framework to explore the genre in. So I like the sort of big tent nature of horror, that you can approach it in 1,000 different ways and it's still considered horror. I find that really exciting as a creative.
And for me, I think, let's see, kind of tying into the endorphin rush I was talking about the joy of horror that I get. I think I experienced that when I was 8 years old. My dad was a huge fan of Aliens, and James Cameron's Aliens, and I wasn't allowed to watch it. My mom wouldn't let me watch it. And then one day, like on a Sunday, my mom was out shopping for the afternoon. My dad had it recorded off of TV, and he's like, all right, I'm going to show you Aliens, but you're not allowed to tell your mother. And it scared the shit out of me and freaked me out. And I immediately broke as soon as I saw her. Like, Dad showed me Aliens. Just instantly narked on him. But that, like, from that moment on, it was, I was terrified, but I recognized that experience, that endorphin rush, that roller coaster rush of it. And it's all I wanted to engage in. And I think Peter and I met, like you said, in 2009. And from the very beginning, every kind of story we talked about working together was always horror or horror adjacent genre, at least sci-fi, whatever. I don't think we've ever had an idea that's just like, two people in a coffee shop meet, like not even once. I don't know. Maybe one day we will, but it's just never been the starting point for anything.
I am sure that there are lots of horror stories that could start in a coffee shop, right? But
Sure. Yeah.
I have actually so many questions, but I think I want to jump into Man Finds Tape. And hopefully we can circle back to some of these questions about writing and about writing together too.
Mhm.
But Man Finds Tape, I'll be honest with you. I saw the trailer. I think I even just kind of saw the teaser or maybe even the artwork, and I was like immediately. I think I just immediately sent you a message. I was like, I didn't even talk to Jeff. I was like, I want to talk to these guys because this looks so good, and I'm so excited about it. Got to see it. Again, it's out December 5th, limited release, but really loved the setup of a mockumentary. And I think that's where I want to start first, if that's good for you. This is set up as a kind of mockumentary. The organizing principle is somebody putting this kind of together rather than a kind of chaotic manifold of, footage that's just found somewhere. So how that came about, why the kind of mockumentary setup, and what that does, both in terms of allowing you to expand on the kind of artistic expression, but also the limits that that places on you, the rules that you have to abide by when you use that kind of thing.
Well, it all started out of practicality. I mean, Peter and I were trying to get another movie going for years that was just too big as a first feature. It's what eventually became our novel, The Dead Friends Society. And we started the conversation about Man Finds Tape by talking about what is something we can do that if everyone else says no, we can still do it anyway. And we started talking about what's our strength, what's our advantage. And I've been producing sports documentaries for about a decade. And we're like, well, I know how to produce documentaries, got a documentary editor, got a documentary cinematographer. My wife is an incredible production designer. We can punch far above our weight in certain areas if we invest in those areas. And also documentary, shouldn't be lit like a Hollywood movie, right? You don't need a huge giant, truck with all the lighting gear and everything. It should feel rough and rough around the edges. So we were kind of like, all right, what if we did something like that? Something, Lake Mungo like, right? Like where would we go with that? So it started with those parameters. We just kind of said, if we work in this box, what can we do? And anytime we're working on an idea, one of the earliest things we do is we go, what do we not like in this genre? And one of the things that we wanted to avoid was that can happen sometimes is why are they still filming? Why are these characters filming right now? And we didn't want that to happen in this movie. So we said, okay, we need to bake that into the actual motivation of who these people are. They're documentarians. They're trying to uncover the truth. It's part of their character arc. Okay. So just adding parameters. And then now what's the story we want to tell? What's the heart we want to inject into it? And then that's kind of when we pulled this, metaphorical card out of a drawer from an old idea we had. Peter, you want to jump in and take it from there?
Yeah, years ago, one of the sort of ideas we had was a fictional podcast that would be about an investigative journalist going to a small town to look into this viral video that had been going around. And the video in question, there's very little other than the setup that has sort of carried forward to this version of it. But the video was always the video. It's the moment of the van hitting the man that's in this thing. And that was the viral video in that podcasty version of it. But it sort of we formed some loose ideas for it, what would happen and how it would sort of increasingly spiral, but hadn't written it out in a full script form. And so then when we decided to make a fake documentary, that's when we were like, okay, what do we have a story that already in our back pocket that fits that? And that's when the podcast one came back, because it was at the time it was about a journalist doing the investigation. We flipped the journalist into a reluctant documentarian, and we just really started to explore the sandbox of how do you not just make a fake documentary, but how do you make it relevant thematically? And since this is about a tape that is, a question mark in this person's past, that this sort of like the inciting tape that kicks it all off, we wanted to explore the themes of what happens when people are presented with evidence that they can't acknowledge their participation in, even though it's being shown right to them. It sort of went hand in hand with the nature of documentary, which is trying to get to the truth, is when you have a story about people who cannot access the truth, it sort of creates an inherent extra meta layer to it that we really had a lot of fun exploring.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo Brian here and say that I really enjoyed the movie. I love found footage horror. I think that, Paul, what you were saying about how kind of like alluding to the fact there's a spectrum of found footage horror where some of it is like Blair Witch Project, where it's just the pieces that you find, or Paranormal Activity earlier on in the franchise. We've recently done episodes on The Bay, which to me is more akin to what y'all are doing with trying to like frame it as there's a narrative here, there's a story being told, not quite like Wreck, where like sometimes the camera is just its own character on the floor watching what happens, that type of thing. We don't get too much of that, but there is this really interesting element of your film that strikes me that does something different for found footage than what I've seen before. And I'm hopefully not giving away a spoiler. If it is, we'll just cut it, pretend we never had this conversation. But the fact that some of the found footage acts on the characters as they watch it. Like there's something really neat about that I've not seen before, where it has an effect on the people watching it, not so much as like hypnotic and sending them off to do like the bidding of some evil lord or something, but rather like it kind of takes them out of time almost and brings them back into time. And maybe this is something that, we can talk about with some of the themes. I know Brian really wants to talk about cosmic horror. Brian's a huge fan of cosmic horror. One of the other things that I think that's neat about this film, but also all found footage, is the way in which like you're talking about this documentary style. All film, all horror has us with this suspension of disbelief, but found footage is particularly like it's not only suspension of disbelief, it's suspension of your disbelief of disbelief, where you're like, this is actually happening. Like all of this is real, all of this is happening, and I'm terrified. But you touch on some like real themes too. We're in an interesting political moment. Interesting might be like the most mild way I could put it. But like the Christian nationalism that seems to be animating large parts of this country. When I saw the trailer, when Brian finally decided to send it to me after he'd already talked to you both, and he was like, oh, by the way, we're doing this thing, which is great. I'm really happy about it. But I was like, oh man, I want to be one of the cool kids in on the club. I was like, oh wow, like the trailer, I'm like, oh man, this is Christian nationalism. This is some weird people being manipulated by the Bible and by a pastor and stuff like that. And that's part of it. I'm not going to say more than that, but that's part of it for sure.
I think, well,
Yeah.
and so I can clarify for the audience, because I think what you were talking about trying to avoid is a part I think we're okay talking about, which is that when the people in some of the footage that is found, when presented with the footage, they kind of pass out. They're incapable of seeing it. Right. And that you're right. That is part of the theme of the movie, and what intrigued us about telling this kind of story was we live, and man, we started writing this. I mean, the original ideas from like the 20 teens, and then we started writing this in 2021, well before AI video was what it is now. And to be clear to your audience, this is not a movie about AI video. It's just what's happened in the world has made it all the more relevant as we've been making this thing. We live in an age where, I don't know about you guys, but my default when I see some crazy video, my default now is to assume, oh, that's not real. It's kind of like everything's gotten so crazy. It's forced us to become a conspiracy theorist to be sane and normal and level. Everything's like inverted. And so that was kind of the theme we wanted to explore and talk about. And really, like, the actual film you're watching as an audience member has pieces missing and makes you question things. In the very end, we throw in one question in particular that hopefully makes you re-examine what you just watched. That was really important. And I think the religious aspect of it kind of came in with, this is a story that takes place in a fictional small town, Texas town. And we live in Austin. And if you drive like 15, 20 minutes in any direction, that's what everything looks like. It's just middle of nowhere. There's a main street, there's a police station, and there's a church. And, they all kind of feel like towns where time just moved on. And, when we were kind of talking about this fictional town and what goes on there, it just kind of felt natural that, the church is kind of the center piece, where everyone congregates the town, and where the source of power is coming from. Also, we found the religious aspect interesting in a story about not believing what you can actually see with your eyes. is really interesting compared to the ultimate form of belief, which is to believe in what you can't see. And so we thought that was like a really interesting dichotomy of I can see it, I don't believe it. I can't see it, I do believe it. And we're not trying to make a statement on religion or anything. It's just we find it an interesting place to tell a story. Peter, anything you want to add on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that you're hitting on, Jeff, is definitely stuff that we thought about and is very intentional. Some of it just evolved with the project over the years that we were working on it. So, for example, we didn't that very first version of it. It wasn't a like, oh, we're gonna make a religious horror movie. Like it was more so once we started to think about, okay, well, who's in the town? Who's going to be involved in this? What's actually happening? And we were like, okay, well, it makes sense that in a small town the character that is going to fly under the radar, who might have the most influence, it's probably going to be either a sheriff or a preacher. And it's like I love Stephen King's religious horror. I love that brand of stuff. So I was like, okay, let's make a preacher involved in this story somehow. And that's not a spoiler. Like the movie opens with us showing the preacher. You know right away there's something going on, and hopefully you don't know what it is, but it didn't start with the intent to make a like this movie is about Christian nationalism. But we are in a time where it's hard to ignore what's going on, particularly when people are just presented with evidence of one thing and they just shut it down. They're like, yeah, no, that doesn't apply to me. And it's like it fit our story so well and has continued to fit it well in ways that we weren't expecting. And I think we really wanted to make a horror movie about people who didn't realize that they were complicit in certain horrors going on in their town. That was the theme that we wanted to explore. And unfortunately, it has become more and more relevant since we first started writing those drafts, and even when we shot it last year. And we were talking to someone else earlier about this, and for me it's kind of like David Cronenberg's The Fly is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and it wasn't made explicitly as an AIDS metaphor at the time. And you could say the same thing of John Carpenter's The Thing, which it wasn't made explicitly about that at the time, but 5-10 years later, those AIDS stories can map on to what they're doing in such a interesting way. And I think thematically for us, the religious horror side of it and the political side of it has started to map onto it faster than maybe we anticipated. But it was definitely intentional for those themes to be seen, if that makes sense.
It's such an incredibly rich answer from both of you, and I think there's so many thoughts that you have kind of brought about for me. And Paul, your conversation about AI, and Peter, and both your conversation about religion, it makes me think about the predation or the predatory nature of like videos right now. We're thinking TikTok, but we have talked before on a Christian nationalist episode, specifically kind of about Christian nationalism and horror, about how so many TikTok videos coming out of churches right now feel like found footage horror. People shooting the Easter Bunny and people performing their religion in ways that just feel. And I think it's interesting to hear a couple of things. Number one, Jeff and I do a lot, we're professors, we do a lot of reading into movies. And so when we watch a movie, we read it forward, we read it into our time. And it's so interesting to hear that as you're writing, the political kind of world, the religious world, the just general world of meaning is catching up to what you're writing, and you're writing alongside this thing. It's so cool. I mean, everything is so cool. I do want to ask you about cosmic horror. So Justin Benson, Aaron Moorhead, they're involved, I think, as producers on this. They have been people that have been making incredible cosmic horror movies for a while. I think cosmic horror is a bit hard to do. So, along with the religious aspect, along with the predatory nature of video, you also have this cosmic horror element in the film. Won't say much more about that, but I want to know if that is something that is part of your kind of horror origin story, right? Do you read and think about cosmic horror? And maybe like I'm just reading this into it, do you see cosmic horror as part of the story that you're telling here? Especially of course, as the religious aspect or whatever it might be.
Definitely. It's interesting because the cosmic side of it, again, sort of emerged organically, and it's just one of those ingredients that we like. The idea of this sort of unknowable, untouchable thing that once you access it does something fundamental to your brain. Like one of my favorite things about Lovecraft's stories is not the, giant scale of Cthulhu. It's the idea that you might enter this realm and see something that is so fundamentally incompatible with your sense of reality that it rewires your brain. Like that's what I like about cosmic horror. And so we definitely set out to do a similar thing here where the story starts as one thing. A brother and sister investigating this piece of footage from their childhood, and it's for the audience sets a sort of like true crimey doc expectations of like, okay, here's where it's gonna go, and if it stays down that road, great. But I think the thing that interests Paul and I the most is like, and then what if at one point when you're not expecting it, it forks down this other road and becomes something even bigger and weirder? And that's really exciting to us. That really interested us in the writing of it and the conceiving of it and mapping on. I love the sense of scale that you can get from Justin and Aaron's movies in particular. The way that they hint at these larger slices of lore and world that are happening just beyond what their characters are interacting with. It's one of those things that I don't know that I necessarily knew that I loved about their films at the time, and it's sort of kind of coincidental that they got involved with this and that their sensibilities are so similar to our sensibilities. But that's what works for me the most about cosmic horror is just that you get to brush up against it just enough for it to sort of color everything around it.
Yeah, and I think one of the really cool things about the Rustic films, which again, Benson Moorhead and then producer David Lawson Jr., is they really like, and that's what this movie is too, is they really like creating puzzles where they don't give you every single piece. They want you to engage with the puzzle and kind of fill in those pieces on your own and your own interpretations. And I think that just lends itself so well to cosmic horror, right? Where good cosmic horror is, it doesn't get to the end of the movie or the book or whatever, and the character is standing in front of the Bond villain who goes, "Here's everything that happened. Here is my plan." They look into the eye of madness, and either they escape or they're consumed. I think it's just when you want to make one of those kind of House of Leaves style puzzle stories, it just fits together. So like Peter said, it wasn't really kind of like at the outset, we weren't going, let's make a cosmic horror story. It was more just we're building it and we're going, like Peter said, what ingredient this needs, what'll set this off. And some of that even got figured out like really close, like into production. There's a sequence towards the end of the movie where you kind of look into the eye of madness, so to speak. And that was something that got added like 2 weeks before we were shooting. We're just looking at the script and we're like, we're not going big enough. We need satisfaction for the audience. We need something here. And Peter knew this really incredible, talented artist named Tim Buell, who makes these incredible liminal space sequences in Blender. And we just hit him up and we're like, hey man, we got an idea. You want to work together on something? And it worked. But yeah, so I think it's just, these things just kind of fit together.
I really like the way in which you blend the cosmic horror with the found footage genre in the film. There's something that I've been thinking about since watching the film where like cosmic horror is on such a large scale, whereas found footage is typically like a much smaller personal scale. And yet both of them tend to happen frequently in these places like you all were mentioning earlier that are kind of small towns that are abandoned where there's nothing happening. We recently did an episode with Anthony Cousins about Frogman, where Loveland, Ohio, kind of like, a Rust Belt, middle of nowhere, small town.
I grew up there in Loveland, Ohio.
Is the Frogman real? No, we'll save that for a later question. That's awesome. Wow. All these points of connection. And maybe it's because at the time I was working on a paper involving the Mandela catalog, but like I'm thinking about how there's something with analog horror, which is kind of an offshoot of found footage. That's what I was really reminded of at the start of this movie. Like the tapes coming in, watching the tapes, trying to figure out what's happening in these tapes, looking at these empty spaces and trying to figure out what's happening here, what's different, what am I missing? Really kind of close reading the film, which is what I teach a lot of in like a writing classroom. But like I guess what I'm asking here in this question that is more of a comment maybe is what is it about these two things that worked for you? Like the found footage genre and then the cosmic horror flavoring or genre.
I I think for found footage, there's a couple different things that I really like about it, and it's the idea that we were talking about suspension of disbelief. When you watch as an audience, when you're choosing to press play on a found footage movie and engage with it, you're sort of engaging with it with this sort of set of rules in place. You're like buying a ticket, knowing like, okay, these are the framework you're gonna give me, and I know that on top of it being a movie it has these other limitations in place. And I think it's a lot of fun to see how filmmakers play with those limitations. But it was fun for us to figure out how to do our version of that. So that just on a filmmaking level interested me in the found footage of it. But I think the on a thematic level, the cosmic horror and found footage do go together really well because I like it when there's characters who are discovering something that's impossible, that's like imprinted itself on an object or a person or something like that, and it's the universe's way of infecting this one thing, and then someone interacting with it becomes infected themselves. And so found footage is very, I mean, our movie's called Man Finds Tape. It was, we are probably in some ways one of the most literal found footage movies because it's a singular object that becomes this source of infection as it gets spread around and as people interact with what was behind that footage. It all became this sort of Ouroboros that was feeding on itself in a way that we thought was really, really cool.
And I think too, it just kind of, this is, I don't know if it's answering the question or kind of like tangential, but I think the concept of evil hiding in places where no one else is looking, that's interesting. Honestly, I think that happens in a lot of horror stories, right? For a reason. And we kind of latch onto that for a reason. My wife and I just started watching the It show, right? And it's like, and I'm reminded like, oh yeah, Derry, just a small little town, right? And it's, and I think there's something interesting about, oh, this is a small random town in Texas where people aren't paying attention. And so the only way to expose these things is low quality security camera footage or like, mini DV tapes and things like that. It's because that's where the evil permeates. That's where it takes power, is the place where people are not looking.
And that it's captured in this sort of innocuous way. Another thing that we talked about a lot is cryptids, and it's the movie opens with talking about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness monster and stuff. But one of the ideas that I love as a kid about cryptids was just this sort of like, oh, what else could exist out there? Like I want to believe in these other creatures that exist alongside us. But then if you sort of you map that onto the modern climate that we're in, and you ask the question like, well, how do monsters, how would a certain kind of monster exist in a day of surveillance? And what if there was a monster that its part of its influence allowed it to hide in a surveilled world? Was really interesting to us. And then that sort of continues. If you go down that path, that's when you start brushing up on the cosmic horror. At least that's the direction that we went.
I really love the intersection of all of that because it seems as though the things at the heart here are how faith and cosmic horror work together. They're both kind of these personal things. People's faith is personal, but it's also this massive scale. And that's where cosmic horror really does take root. But also, there's like a sense in which the idea of surveillance as both revealing and concealing is an exciting idea. And there's just something really cool about the kind of confluence of faith and found footage and cosmic horror that I think gives us a kind of rumination on faith, but also maybe maps onto, we talked to Clay McLeod Chapman about his book, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. I don't know if you've read this book or heard about it. It's very unsubtle about what it's doing. We have kind of dubbed it MAGA horror, dealing with how really his kind of premise of the book is what would happen if in fact the satanic aspect of things was just showing up through MAGA Christianity, right? And I'm not saying that that's what you're doing here, but if it is, it's a much more subtle take. It's a nuanced take that allows a kind of audience infiltration of the idea. And even that cosmic horror of like, oh, now I'm connected to it. I've seen it, and now it's infected me, and I'm going to infect other people. This kind of strange evangelical, not necessarily Christian, but evangelical pushing of an idea that continues to move on and move on and move on. Happy to talk about faith if you're up for it. I think I part of the question you and Paul, you got me thinking about this when you mentioned Smile 2, because I think of Smile 2 as like slow panic choreography. Like there's these like slow moments of choreography, but that opening shot, like you were talking about, the shot that kind of, I don't know, framed everything around this shot of the guy getting hit by the van, takes a lot of choreography. Curious about how directing those kinds of scenes work out. We also talked to Gwendolyn Keist, who kind of revealed that she used to be a director and was, maybe not as nice and didn't really have a great rapport with her actors. What is the kind of, that scene requires some choreography. How did that work, and just in terms of being the director?
Sure. Yeah. Specifically, we're talking about the hit and run scene in the town square. I mean,
Yeah.
complicated to shoot. I mean, first off, we're shooting that scene on a GoPro, like mounted up on a I don't know what, like a light pole sort of thing.
Yeah, it was
Like,
just a telephone pole.
yeah,
Or no, it was a light
complicated.
pole, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the amazing things about shooting in small town Texas is that's Main Street for Granger, Texas. And that's literally the police station, like in the shot. We shut that street down for $100. That was what they want. They just said, you just need to set up the barricades on your own. We're like, yeah, no problem. Honestly, the biggest complication was just other traffic and negotiating other traffic and just trying to get it right. And it's a shot done with pieces. I mean, it's sorry to break the magic, but I mean, it's like different pieces and VFX stitching things together. I think the shot is actually technically like 3 different pieces stitched together, maybe 4. And so we were just kind of shooting it. Like literally, I remember we thought we had it. I threw the SD card like in my laptop in my car and quickly like threw it into editing and like just did a very rough stitching it together. We all looked at it. And we're like, okay, it'll work. It'll work. Aaron Moorhead will do the proper version of this. It'll work. I don't know, Peter, you probably maybe you have a better answer. I just remember it being very technical and complicated.
It was very technical and complicated there, but there is a danger element of hitting something with a car. And so talking about working with actors, the person who does get hit was our producer, and he was very insistent on that. Dave Lawson was like, I'm going to be the one who stands in front of the car. Like the way that we had planned and blocked it, like we weren't hitting a person for real. But if whoever's driving the car foot slips and they slam on the gas or whatever, like there is a possibility of danger there. And
I was driving the
sure.
car. I was driving the van, and Dave was. So we were making sure if anything happened, we're only hurting ourselves. We're not hurting these people we've hired to come on to this.
Yeah. And so that one was definitely tense. I mean, we don't want anything to go wrong, but we did it in the safest way possible. I actually think that sequence is one that benefits greatly from the style in which we presented in the end, which we dropped the frame rate to make it look more like a proper security camera, and we crunched it up. And it's kind of those things that like the blockier and the jankier the image gets, the more realistic it becomes. And we found that not just for that sequence, but some of the other security camera stuff throughout the film is that the more the shittier it became, the more gold it was. And we really liked that aspect of it. And then as far as working with the actors for all of the other bigger horror set pieces and whatnot, like it was really just a very collaborative thing. And we have a lot of practical horror elements in this film. Everything is something that someone could interact with to some degree. There were, real makeup appliances, real spurts of blood, that kind of stuff. And one of the unexpected benefits of that, combined with our found footage style, was there was a challenge to shoot it because you can't, on a normal film, if you have a big horror gag that you want to show off, you can frame it up just right and you can get the perfect lighting on it and you know your exact angle of what it's going to be and you get this big hero moment. But we couldn't do that with our style. We were building sets that could be shot 360 degrees so that the camera, depending on where Kelsey the actress swung it in that moment, it might see something. So we got to make sure that a crew person isn't there or whatnot. And we had actually originally planned that she would get particularly close to this one very gory makeup appliance. And then on the day, as she was seeing it and she was talking through it as a character, as Lynn the character, she was like, why would I get this close to this freaky gory thing? Like I wouldn't. Like I would stop here. And so, that was a good learning moment for us where we were like, okay, yeah, we're not going to force the character to get closer because in a weird way that would actually break the immersion of it. It actually, even though it might look cooler if we shot it from this angle in this light, it breaks the immersion. So we're not going to go down that road. We're going to stop here and we're going to trust the actor's instincts. And that we could only do that because it was a really collaborative environment and we had really sort of emboldened all of the actors to work with us and be like, okay, I think that now that we're in this space, it makes more sense if I moved here and he moved here and we would reblock the scenes and reconfigure scenes based on their instincts, which was really fun.
One just going back to that security camera Main Street shot for a second. One fun anecdote that I don't think we've told anybody yet. And this is indie filmmaking. All right, this is how you know it's indie filmmaking. So my wife, our production designer and one of our producers, and she was looking into rentals for because we needed a body, a dummy body, and looking into the prices of them. They're not cheap, the professional ones. And what was half the price? A sex doll on Amazon. So she ordered a sex doll on Amazon and it worked great. It worked great. So I'm just saying, indie filmmaking, don't knock it. Search Amazon, see what's on there.
You do what it takes.
Yeah.
That's actually really incredible. Thank you for sharing that with us. I love that. Yes. So as Jeff kind of mentioned, we've been doing a few episodes of found footage now. And one of the things that I've been kind of curious about, and as filmmakers, I'm interested in your take on this. So, the Turing test. So the Turing test is this idea that, if you can convince somebody that you're talking to a computer when you don't know if you are or you're not, then you've kind of proven that there's some kind of artificial intelligence, right? That there's something behind it. But there are games that people play and competitions that people have, and they'll manipulate the kind of setup. So they'll tell you that this is a 5-year-old speaking. And so when it kind of acts a little weird, you're like, well, okay, is that a 5-year-old or this is, English is not my first language, so please bear with me, right? There's something that's popped in my head that found footage, in part, Turing tests reality in that same way, in that it's like not tricking you, but it's giving you the setup where you're like, I don't know if this is real. I can't tell. And I love your kind of comment about the character Lynn, the actor having the camera as being part of the generation of the world. So the two things I'm here really asking you is like the generation of meaning in found footage. Is this like a kind of trickery where you're like, I'm trying to get the audience to really question reality here? But two, is it the case that the actors in many instances are the ones doing the filming because they're holding the camera?
Yeah, I'll start that. So as far as the sort of impression of reality and tricking people into reality, we wanted to keep the rules of the documentary as realistic as possible in that it would feel like a documentary, that we would cut to screenshots of Reddit posts and photographs and B-roll and have access and have created all those different elements that make the story feel bigger, and that we've selected that, we only have time to show you these 10 things or whatever to include that. So that was sort of the reality of it. I don't know that we never thought that anyone would think that this was a real movie just because of where the story goes. So like we were less concerned about trying to trick anyone into thinking it was a real documentary, but we were very concerned with sticking to the format and what these filmmakers would have access to if they had come across this footage. And then the second part of your question about what Kelsey's filming, we had this sort of hybrid approach where the characters that were holding cameras, they were rolling. We were running their takes, and they would move around, and we would do a couple takes of it to see what their movements looked like and where they were pointing the camera at certain times. And then once we had that version of it, our cinematographer David Kuhn, who is also a documentarian cinematographer, he was watching the monitor the whole time that Kelsey was doing her things, and then he would then go through and he would recreate those movements so that we could make sure that if something needed to be in focus at a certain time, it was. And Kelsey would shadow right behind him so that actors could still react to her and she could still deliver her lines. And so we did that. And then we actually sort of ran into a scenario where, because we use a mixture of her footage and David's footage, even though he was doing a sort of, we had to keep asking him to do a worse job because he had to match the reality of what the non-professional was getting. And so it was actually interesting to keep asking him to fight his instincts. It was okay if some things did fall out of focus or miss a mark or whatnot. Like that actually that added
it.
to the flavor of it. Yeah.
And as well, like both Kelsey, who plays Lynn, and William, who plays Lucas, have both directed short films themselves, right? So they part of the conversation bringing them on was, you are going to be a bigger part of the filmmaking process in this than you normally would be as an actor. And so like William has a camera, like a lot of that stuff in the first 30 minutes, that's William holding the camera, and that it's really a part of the performance. And we knew that it was going to be. If it just, there's that, kind of earlier we were talking about the rules and things that break the immersion in these kind of films. And a thing that bothers me in some films is like when you're watching a FaceTime call or something, and it's like they're perfectly lit, perfectly centered, everything's, and it's just like, it kills me a little. And I understand why it happens. It's hard to make a movie. I'm not knocking anybody. It's complicated and you need continuity and stuff. But we tried to put a lot of effort into making sure all of these things felt rough and rugged and messy and real. And, the stuff shot on iPhones is shot on an iPhone. The mini DV is shot on mini DV. The only kind of cheat we really did was the security cameras we shot on GoPros, but that was really just so we could monitor them properly. And because real security cameras have variable frame rates, and it just would have made it a nightmare for VFX. And so it was kind of like, but everything else was on the format that you're seeing.
And another thing that really helped with the sort of continuity of reality in it is that Kelsey and William do have filmmaking backgrounds, and they already know how to hold a camera and how to frame up a shot and stuff. And so one of the things that kind of does bug me about not just found footage movies, it happens a lot in found footage movies, but other movies where the characters are filmmakers, is you cut to a shot of an actor and you see the camera is like pointed to the ground, or it's like aimed at someone's knees, and then they cut to what that camera is supposed to be seeing, and it's like a perfectly framed shot on their face, and you're like, well, that's not, 2 seconds ago you showed me what the camera was pointed at, and now I'm seeing it and I know that that's not what that was pointed at. And so we were very meticulous and lucky in that we had filmmakers that knew how cameras worked and knew where to point them, and so we didn't have to coach them, and we didn't have to work around that problem.
I like that. And that's like part of what I mean by the Turing test stuff is right here the person is making a film, right? They have some familiarity with the camera. You go to something like the Bay or Rec, and they both are like supposedly manned by, right, professional people with cameras, and so you're like, oh, they kind of know what's going on, and so you're like, oh, why is it so well shot and well, all that stuff. In my head, I'm like, yeah, you're just tricking me into like believing that this is found footage in some way. But all that to say, what I'd love to do right now is to ask you both if you found joy in horror recently. So Dan finds tape. Jeff and I, he dropped off internet problems, but we both found incredible joy.
We're boring. I get it.
He's got cats. I don't know. He just wanted to go play with his cats. He missed them.
That's fair.
Yeah, what have you found joy in lately? We found joy in Man Finds Tape, the kind of mockumentary style of it, the intersections of cosmic horror and faith and political stuff and the nature of the internet and all that stuff. I think an incredibly joyful horror movie. But for you, anything out there recently that you have found joy in? Paul, maybe or Peter, we'll jump to you.
Thank you for saying that. It's very nice to hear that people are enjoying it. For me, so I'm in this weird zone. My day job is I'm the senior programmer for South by Southwest, and I program across all the features in TV, and then within that I program the Midnighters. And so for a like half the year, I'm watching films that are very unfinished and won't come out for a couple months from now, if not years from now. And so there's a lot of stuff that has been giving me joy, particularly on the genre front, that I would love to talk about right now, but that I can't talk about yet. So I'm in this weird zone where there's not a lot for me to recommend yet of what I've recently been watching. The one that I'm only halfway through the season is the Alien TV show. I'm slowly catching up with Alien Earth, and I'm really really digging that. So that would be the most recent joy for me.
I would say for me, I mean, this feels like probably such a mainstream common answer, but watching Weapons was, or I think we talked about Weapons earlier. That was such a joy to experience because, again, as Peter and I are people that we know how movies are made, right? Like we understand what's under the hood. Anytime I can watch something where I have no idea where it's going is so joyful for me. And so that was a movie where just the whole time I had a smile on my face because every scene was surprising me. Likewise, less so horror, but Pluribus, my wife and I just started watching Pluribus, and similar thing where I'm just like, I have no clue where this is going. I cannot even imagine, like I can't comprehend what the next episode's going to be about. And I love that. And I think that's happening at a macro level, that audiences are like, people are showing up and Weapons is making $200+ million because audiences are over the formulaic, applause now sign kind of movies, and they want to see something where they don't know where it's going, which I think is a really exciting time for genre filmmakers in particular, because this is, for genre filmmakers, this is like our bread and butter, right? This is what we like to do. And so I think the the big picture Hollywood system is kind of figuring out, like, oh, maybe the audience wants what these freaks have been making for decades, and playing at small genre festivals and stuff like that, and getting streaming only releases. Maybe we should be putting Weapons in thousands of screens, like, and things like that. And so I think that's been really joyful and inspirational for me and Peter as we've been writing our next film, kind of like talking about what we love about this kind of movement in genre cinema right now, and how we can do kind of our own spin on that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Peter, Paul, thank you so much both for joining us. It has been a real pleasure to talk found footage, to talk cosmic horror, mockumentary horror, all of those. Listeners, once, if you have the opportunity, if it is in a movie theater near you, Man Finds Tape, it is coming to screens December 5th. Ideally, if you can't see it in its initial limited release, you will have the opportunity to see it at some point in the future.
I'll just jump in, and I'm gonna echo Jeff here and say, like, if you get a chance to see this, see this. It's so much fun. I think the genre aspects are unique and just a ton of joy. I want to know if you all could give us an idea of where people could see this. I know it's playing at the Draft House. Any other places that it's playing?
Yeah, so it's playing at Alamo Drafthouse in Austin, New York, and LA starting December 5th, but it's also on VOD December 5th. So you can watch it at least in America, you can watch it anywhere. You can rent it, buy it, and watch it on your Apple Watch, just like the filmmakers intended, whatever. I'm kidding. Please watch it on a TV at least. I don't know, watch it on an iPad. Whatever works for you. But yeah, just anywhere, yeah. In America. Worldwide will come later.
Okay. VOD, December 5th. It's coming. Get your iPads out, get your Apple Watches ready. Watch it however you can. Man Finds Tape, a ton of fun. Echoing Jeff, yeah, just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for talking movies, horror, found footage, and thank you for finding joy with us. We really loved having
Likewise.
y'all on.
Thank you for
so
taking
much.
the time to support indie horror.
Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, y'all.
Have a good day.
Yeah, that's it for today. And remember, find joy, even in horror. This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.